sex and then people blow themselves up to get into heaven and have pussy.
Oh my God, Chris.
I'm not allowed to say that anymore. Okay,
Chris. Don't hit that.
Okay. Anyway, let's keep going. Let's find some more neutral topics.
Do something like cloud.
Cloud. Okay.
Cloud?
Romance I'm trying to pick something not related.
Yeah. Okay.
Related.
Cloud.
Is that
Okay.
too weird?
I mean, it's. I don't know what to connect it to, so let's just
Well,
go over
romance.
here.
Yeah,
Like
romance.
cloud
Maybe like.
Oh, I'm on cloud now. Okay.
Nice.
All right. Cool. So I'll just put 9 here, and that'll be like the. Yeah. And then.
Well,
Some node.
And then.
Romance,
Yeah. We gotta read backwards. Right, because that's the thing about this is that there's no like directions on these edges, right? So it's like it's a symmetric relationship between all these. You could draw directions on them, right? Sometimes one thing makes you think of another, but not the other way around. Like causality, right? You think when you say A causes B, usually it's because A comes before B, but not the other way around, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it happened the other way around, you just they're associated with each other. Okay. So yeah, so this is like a semantic network. It's just like a relationship of ideas, and we could keep going for a while like this. And but so the idea is that like if you kind of just like erased all these labels, you know, it would kind of look like a brain, right? In the sense that there's like if you just imagine these are neurons, that's like a kind of a similar structure, right? There's a lot more neurons in your brain than there are concepts, probably, but it's got a certain kind of like blur your eyes. They kind of look the same. And that's what I was, that's what I wanted to talk about today. This like how to sort of have a single way of thinking about the brain and the mind, so you can like have them in the same context. So let's talk about counting. I know I like numbers, but we won't talk about it for too long. So how do you count things? Someone like just explain to me like on 5.
Start with 1
Okay.
and go up from there.
Okay. So like how many? There's a bunch of things. How would I count the things here?
Start with 1.
Okay, so maybe over here.
Yeah.
And that's one thing. And then
And then move on to the next one.
which one is the next one?
Whichever one you want.
Okay, you
Besides
pick.
that one, go to heat.
Heat. Okay.
So that'd be
Which
2.
is actually an anagram of hate. I just realized. Whoa. So.
But then you also, in counting, you have to acknowledge that you've already counted the first one.
Yeah.
So you have to like mentally like cross that out.
Yeah. So that
So
kind of like
you
goes in my
don't
pocket.
recount it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in your pocket.
Yeah. and then okay. So heat, and then.
And then you move on to the next one.
Okay. You
Which
pick.
would be family.
Okay.
Or
Family. Okay. Let's do family. Okay. So we're not going along edges.
Yeah. Well,
Well, we could, but we don't have to, right?
yeah.
Okay. So family, and we're not counting edges either. We're counting the labels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that you're counting one way, but it's not necessarily the only way to count.
Yeah.
Right? And like when you just define a way to count something, it's kind of like putting boundaries around things. Right? You're saying like this is a thing, that's a thing, that's a thing. Or like you were talking about distinctions earlier. Someone was. Right. So you think about like when people argue, a lot of times they're arguing about like, oh, these two things are the same. And the other person's saying, no, these two things are different. Right? Does that kind of resonate with people?
Yeah.
That's like basically the only two things you can really disagree about. And likewise, when you like make a mistake on something, you can like associate things that weren't supposed to be associated, or you can fail to associate things that should have been. Like, oh, I didn't realize those two things were the same thing. So yeah, let's talk about. Familiar with the cognitive idea of chunking? It's a cognitive science term.
Where are you going to that?
You didn't? Okay. Well, so but everyone does it. It's like you know, it's like when you first learn to read.
Are you guys okay if I close that?
Yeah, it's really odd.
So it's like, okay, you remember you first learned to read, and you probably had to look at each letter separately, right? And then you got better at reading, and you start to notice little patterns that happen over and over, like the ER tends to come together, and PHO maybe, if you eat soup, and or read phonics. And you know, just like you get these little patterns that build up that are common, right? And then they kind of become one thing. It starts out as like maybe 3 letters, maybe you know you see the 2 letters, let's say. But then after a while, you get so used to you know what sound that makes, you know, and it just becomes you know you can just sort of glance at that and you know it's one thing. You don't have to like carve it up into pieces, right? So the 2 things became one thing. It's kind of like you zoom out. Imagine like you go up in an airplane and like when you're like down on the ground, you see all the different people, the different buildings, the different windows, and then you go like up in the plane, and like it all just kind of like fades into just one little box on the bottom, right? Right. So that's and then you got better at reading, and then you started maybe just you glance at a word, you recognize it immediately, right? Or you could maybe you can see phrases that you recognize. Right, so when you're reading, you just see this, and it's like you see a little bit of it, and your brain just sort of auto-completes, right? So there's not, what I'm trying to say is like we're talking about, there's not like a canonical way to count things. There's not like a one right way to count this thing. It's not really one thing, and it's not really many things. It's how you choose to carve it up, right? So who here thinks of themselves as like one person? Sometimes at least. Yeah. Okay. Anybody like usually not think of themselves as one person? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, some people say like the royal we, or you kind of talk to yourself and you have this sort of like, I don't know. Some people do that. Now, if you do it too much, people like kind of call you crazy, right? And what's that?
That's like Smeagol. Doesn't he have like two personalities?
Gollum and there's Smeagol.
Yeah, he like refers to himself in third person, like he's a separate thing.
Like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah. So there's these sort of, and you can really, but if you think about it, the brain does have like lots of different parts, and people feel conflicted about things sometimes, right? It's like one part of you wants to do this, and another part is like, actually, you probably shouldn't do that. And that's kind of like two people arguing, right? If you could choose to count it in such a way that there's actually multiple people in there, and they're disagreeing about what to do. And like, sometimes my stomach wants me to eat one thing, and then my tongue is like, no, sugar tastes better, we should eat that instead. And then they get in a war with each other, and then I usually let the stomach win because I think it's smarter. But yeah. So okay. So what? All right. So did you learn about connectomes?
No,
No. Okay. All right.
it's all you.
All right. Here we go. So this word, I'm gonna write a word. This is a connectomeme. This is a made-up word. I made it up, and that you can make up words. That's like, people try to tell you not to make up words, but you should. Okay, so these are, it's a portmanteau of two words that already existed, so it's fair game. And so connectome is, like in your brain, there's all these neurons, right? You can study just the neurons in isolation, or you can study how they're all connected to each other. Like you get a map of how every neuron in your brain and who they're friends with, or who they're in communication with, right? So that's the connectome. And so that's this big project in MIT. They're talking about mapping the connectome, and it's going to take a whole bunch of time. But they've already done it on much smaller creatures that have a smaller number of neurons, and so they can see how the neurons get reused for different things. So that's what a connectome. What's a meme? You've probably heard of memes, right? No? Yeah? Who wants to tell me? Is that you? No.
Like the internet memes? Yeah.
Well, that's an example of memes. Yeah. So what are you talking about?
I mean, I've only ever heard of internet memes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, can you describe them?
Yeah. Like I think it's usually like the same picture. Yeah, with like a different saying. Like the guy who's like, I don't usually do this, but when I do this.
Yeah.
That's like a meme, right?
Yeah. Totally. Well, okay.
Yeah,
So
I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
yeah. So that's the term actually originated from a biologist, Richard Dawkins, and he was trying to describe how ideas replicate themselves and proliferate in a way that's, in some ways, very similar to genes, right? So it's like, it kind of looks similar. Got two E's in it. Also, it's like the French word for self, right? Or like this is a self-referential word. So yeah. So the idea is we smash these things together and you get a connectomeme. So what is a connectomeme? It is a mathematical model, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview of it. In fact, I'll just give you a picture because that'll be better.
Wait, I have a question. You said like internet memes are like one kind of meme. What's another one?
Okay,
I'm sure this biologist guy didn't come up with it. No, like a biologist.
What?
Right?
Yeah. So the idea is that memes become popular. There's no like committee that like decides which memes are going to go where. It's more like some memes just become popular because they resonate with different people a lot.
Can you just give some examples of memes that aren't on the internet?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Oh,
asking.
okay,
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, example that's not like.
Really, talking about memes, it's really any idea. It's you could just swap out the word idea and it would basically work. The idea of using a separate term is because it puts it in a different context. The idea is it's like thinking about an idea as something that can have a life of its own and that can be friendly to humans or neutral or even malicious to humans. Right? I mean, people talk about cycles of violence. Right? It's like these things where people do these things and it doesn't actually help anyone involved, but people keep doing them for some reason. Right? So it's a sort of idea pattern. And more examples of memes would be like a sports team, or a religion, or a country, or even a personality, or just like anything that you would put a boundary around and say, that's a thing. When people say, oh, it became a thing. Somebody made up a word.
It's like a distinction.
Yeah, it's like a distinction. Yeah, like you put a boundary around something. And you say, this is what I'm referring to, and everything else is not what I'm referring to. And so that's like, you're like carving up the world into pieces. Right? So sometimes the sword is a symbol of intellect.
But it's not just any idea. It's an idea that replicates itself very quickly and spreads.
No, it's more thinking of an idea in terms of how it could do that. Because it doesn't have to do it quickly, and it might actually do it badly and just die very quickly. Oh. So it's more, just like you could have a gene that's like not very successful and it just like pops up and then disappears. But if it doesn't stick around long enough, then it's not even there long enough to give it a name. If it has a name, it's already kind of stable. But yeah, so this idea of chunking, where you can kind of like take multiple data points and aggregate them into a smaller number of data points, right? So it's sort of like how many groups are in the room right now? Well, you could say it's like one group, because like we're all in one big group, right? But then you could also say, well, there's smaller groups because it's like some people are closer friends than others, right? I don't know any of you, but I know these two, and so it's like we're in a group. But then, does that kind of make sense? The idea is that, yeah, okay.
Like girls and boys, or like
that would be an example of yeah, and so this idea of, but you can chunk the chunks. The idea is like once you get used to thinking of multiple things as one thing, once you have the tag for that group, then you can then stick that tag in other groups, right? So it's like I'm Chris, that's my name, and then but then I'm also like a member of my family, and then my family is a member of we all live in the same nation, right? And we all live on the same planet, we're all the same species, and so there's like sort of this hierarchy of identities of something. Okay, it's like. And I was fascinated with this because I was studying. I started out in college. I was studying piano, and they ask you to like, you're supposed to like learn this piece, and a lot of times they're like so long you can't fit them all in your head at once. So we had to sort of like break them up into pieces, and found that I could get used to a certain pattern so that I didn't have to think about it anymore. It's like when you first learn how to drive. How many things are you doing when you first learn how to drive? You put your foot on the pedal. You got your hands doing this, you're looking around, you're making sure you don't talk to people. Hopefully. Right, but then after a while, it all becomes like, it all pushes into the background. It just becomes driving. It's just one thing. Right, and then you can start to kind of juggle them. And so you have you're driving while eating a hamburger or something.
You need to turn it on.
Oh, right. Turn it on button. Machines. Okay, so I made this visualizer, and it works on an iPad, but I'm going to put it on an iPad simulator so we can look at it. The idea is that we have, can I make this brighter?
It will.
Oh, it does? Okay.
It just takes a while.
It has to warm up? Okay. So you can already kind of see there's all these data points, right? And the idea is that, you kind of like blur your eyes, they kind of like, there's a big group here, and there's a big group here, right? So I'm trying to formalize, like, what does it mean for things to be different or the same? And so here we have this little slider, and what the slider does is it says, I'm gonna cut off any edge that's larger than some distance. So right now, when it's here, all the possible edges between any pair of data points, they all got clipped because this threshold said, okay, at the bottom, everything's clipped, everybody's on their own. Right? This is like particle physicists like this kind of view, right? Everything's separate. We give everything a name, and nothing's significant. So So then the idea is if you move this up all the way up, well then we didn't cut almost any of the edges. So then everything's connected. Right, so you kind of imagine that, that if you kind of stretch this out, you know, in 3D, you would have, on this side, there's just one group, or maybe there's two groups. Imagine they're all connected. There's just like one big group. And then on the other side, down here, everybody's in their own group. Right, so it's like completely coagulated, completely dissolved. Right, and then there's all this interesting stuff in the middle, where it's like crystals forming, where there's like groups forming where we have
Similarities?
yeah, there's and here similarities just represent by like visual closeness, but it could mean anything.
So it's like chunking.
It's like chunking, yeah, exactly. And then you chunk the chunks after they've been chunked. You chunk them into more chunks. And so they in engineering, computer science, and machine learning, they have another sort of thing they call clustering, and it's effectively the same thing, but they don't like to talk to psychologists, so they have. I don't think they realize they're talking about the same thing, but so yeah, you can see this sort of, and it's like it has a zoom level, right? It's sort of like here I'm zooming way in, and I'm just looking at just the thing in isolation, right? And so those are like maybe more scientific types that like to cut things into pieces and look at all of them, and then this is more like holism, where like people want to look at the big picture, or maybe like I'm a sociologist, I want to like see how the whole thing is working as a group. I don't necessarily care about all these little pieces. I'll smear out the details. And this, I mean, if you know anything about like quantum physics, this is sort of like, this is more on the wave function side, and then this is more on the particle side. Let's see, here they all get smeared together based on they're all similar to each other. And so all the time I hear people argue. You know, no, that's different, and someone says that's the same, and it's because I think they're at different zoom levels. You know, the threshold for what it means to be similar is just different. But I think it's valuable to be able to zoom in and zoom out, so you see things from different people's perspectives. So this is what connectomemes are about, just providing a mathematical way of understanding this. So the idea is that you have a bunch of things, let's say vertices, right? It's like a set of things. You got like a bunch, we'll give them numbers, right? And you've got edges between them, right? So these are like pairs of, you got like one vertex connected to another, and then you got another one. Right, this is like I2. Don't worry about the notations so much. Okay. I get it. So you have these, you know, this is like what we're talking about. We have these vertices and we have edges. And then you have weights on the edges. The idea is, and that represents how strong the connection is. It's like when I think of love, how strongly does that make me think of heat? You know, and you could formulate this in terms of like neurons. How frequently, when this neuron fires, does this one fire right afterwards? Right. So that would be a way to measure the strength of the connection, if you wanted to. And so then you have this threshold, and that threshold says, okay, wait, before I go through that. So once you have these weights, it implies a sort of distance between any pair. You can sort of say, okay, this guy and that girl over there, like how far apart are they? And you can look at, oh, well, you know, to get the shortest path to get from one to the other would be like, you know, go up here and I got to follow these people and eventually I make it over there. And by summing up all those weights or combining them in some way, you have a notion of distance between any pair of these. Right, and so that's the idea, is that you know, getting this idea of how similar, what's the distance between two ideas. So this is a way to sort of connect with there's a hardware and software of the brain. So let's talk about memes, because this is just like a way of thinking about your brain. Actually, no, let's not talk about memes yet. Okay, because what's neat about this is that the idea is you can, once you have like a tight cluster. Remember we had like a tight cluster over here. It was like love and family and sex and heat and all these things. And they're all connected to each other. So it's like you kind of imagine there was like a cluster of neurons that were so tightly connected that when one of them fires, they all fire. So in some sense, if you kind of blur your eyes a little bit, it's really just like one neuron. So you could just take that network and just collapse that chunk into a single thing. Does that kind of make sense? So the idea. So okay. So then you can say, well, I have this semantic network, and then good picture in my head. I'm gonna try. Okay. Okay. And the thing is maybe kind of complicated, right? We have this ring here, and then the ring has like things dangling off of it, right? But inside of it is if you just sort of not look at the things dangling off of it, it has a version of itself, a simplified version of itself. Right, so when people talk about self-awareness, what do you think does someone have a definition of self-awareness they like?
Like knowledge of how you work and how you are.
Yeah. So it's like you have a description of yourself. And that description is necessarily less complicated than you actually are, right? So it's like leaves out some details, certain things you don't get to know about yourself, like probably don't know how many neurons you have, or you probably don't know exactly why you do all the things you do. But we just kind of like go along for the ride, you know? And so this idea of taking the complicated graph and collapsing it to a simpler version of itself is like, you familiar with fractals? No? Okay, so fractals like any kind of like self-similar object. So it's like, that's a triangle, and then there's a bunch of triangles inside those triangles, right? And then there's like little triangles inside the triangles, right? And so the idea is that if you zoom in, it still looks like the same thing, basically. Does that kind of make sense? So you kind of think of the brain as like that, or the mind is like that. And so you think of self-awareness or self-consciousness as like complex self-description. You have this little voodoo doll of yourself in your head, and that's like the story you tell about like when you're trying to explain to yourself why you stubbed your toe, or like why you're mad at your friend, or why you love her, and or anything like that. So yeah, okay, breathing time. Yeah, so the thing is, you don't just have a voodoo doll of yourself, right? You also have voodoo dolls of other people. Right? You never really know everything about another person. You have this like little simplified copy of them, and like, well, they like these things, and they speak these languages, and we have these shared memories that we can reference together, right? And so you have this sort of, you might have one of these. Maybe this is maybe someone else's brain, and then I have, let's say, somewhere in my brain, there's how many are there? 6. And then, so somewhere in my brain, maybe, let's say, this is like Michelle's brain. It's a lot more complicated than this, but right. And this is somewhere in my brain. I have some model of her, and it's less complicated than the real thing. But if there's a way to simplify this, like say you collapse it down to maybe cut off all the dangling things. Collapsing mine and collapsing hers gets to the same thing. So it's like, okay, we can't decide on which flavor of soup we like. I like this flavor of soup, she likes this flavor of soup. Okay, but we both agree that we like soup, right? So we kind of like blur the details and suddenly arrive at identity between the two things. So you can imagine, and you probably experience this if you think about it when you have like a friend you know really well, or maybe a family member, and you feel like you can just kind of know what they're thinking a little bit, or at least you have a pretty good guess at what they're thinking, more so than when you just meet someone. Right, so you can imagine that this is a sort of synchrony. You've got your flashes of neurons and their flashes of neurons, and you both also have little voodoo dolls of each other, right? Where I'm trying to simulate her flashes, she's trying to simulate my flashes, and if they're close enough, then they can start to synchronize. Right? I mean, lots of things synchronize, right? Heartbeat synchronize if you get them close enough. That's how pacemakers work. You just like have like a little electronic heart and put it next to your real heart, and then it sets a beat, and they want to synchronize after a while. Similar thing with like women's periods. A lot of women if they spend a lot of time together, periods synchronize. I totally don't need to tell you all that. But But if those things can synchronize, then the brain should be able to synchronize too. So, thank you.
Is it like when you hang out with someone for an extended period of time, you start acting like them?
Yeah, that's another way to think about it too. Or that would be another example of that. It's like, and that's like memes being contagious, right? Which is okay. You know, some of them are actually like good. It's like you're learning by observation. Like, hey, look, they're good at studying. I'm gonna learn how to study better from them. Or they like know how to get along with people better, and so I'm gonna imitate them.
Yeah. I know like laughs are also contagious.
Yes.
Like your laughs can transfer to other people.
Yeah. Or sometimes like I'll be in a restaurant and I'll just sort of like, you know, just like sit and listen to other people's conversations because I'm bored, and then and then I'll hear, it'll be weird. It'll be like on opposite sides of the restaurant, one person will use like an unusual word. It's not like a really unusual word, but like it just kind of pops up, and then right after it, someone on the other side of the restaurant uses the word, and I don't think they were listening to each other because they're both talking. So, but it's like maybe part of our brain is like filtering it out. I don't know. Weird things happen all the time. Someone else had their hand up.
Yeah, I had a question. So when you said like that, this kind of like syncing can happen between brains. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Is that like what mirror neurons are?
Or that would be a.
But doesn't that happen like within your? Like what is that? Like what do you mean that brains like sync?
Yeah, it would be like mirror neurons would be are probably the main way that happens. They have like a simulation of what the other person is doing, and then it kind of like it blurs the distinction between you and them, just like so that you can sort of install whatever they're doing. In fact, that may be the sort of like the way that memes sexually reproduce, right? Is that through your mirror neurons? You see someone else do it, and then it's like, well, maybe I should do that too, even if it's not a good idea. Right? They talk about like drug addiction. That there's, you know, a lot of times for people to overcome the drug addiction, they have to be put in a different social circle because they're surrounded with people that are reactivating those patterns inside their head. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I guess I was asking for like, well, I mean, yes, but also like, what are other ways that brains sync? I guess.
Okay. Well, there's another link there, which is that. So it's not just that I have like a model of you in my head, you have a model of me in your head. I also have a model of your model of me, and it's a lot simpler than your model of me. But it's still like I have a vague idea of what you think of me, and you have a vague idea of what I think of you, and it's sort of like turtles all the way down. You could keep following that back and forth, and I think the deeper that goes, the stronger that synchrony is. Another way that brains can synchronize is just like, I mean, sleep cycles, right? I mean, when you live with people, a lot of times you tend to start waking up and going to sleep at the same time, just because you tend to wake each other up. And what's other ways people's brains sync?
When you say the same thing another person's thinking, or vice versa?
Yeah. Some people, there's jinx, right? And you owe someone a Coke or something. I don't know how Coke got their product placement into like, I don't know, it's weird. But what was I gonna do? So another interesting possible way brains can sync is, so there's this interesting research paper by these Israeli scientists, and they took human pineal glands from dead people and crushed them up and looked at all the crystals in it. And there are a special type of crystal in our human brain that are piezoelectric. Does anyone know what piezoelectric means? No?
I don't even know what glands you just said right now.
Okay. Okay. This is good to know because they don't like to tell you about this in neuroscience because it's weird. So, can I turn this? Is that how I press the button? Okay. Twice. Make sure you really mean it, human. Okay, so you got like your brain. This is my. So you got like your hemispheres, right? And then right in the middle here, and the Hindus call it the third eye, but it's called the pineal gland. Pineal.
Am I the only one who didn't know that?
Probably not.
It's kind of obscure.
Okay, and its most well understood function is that it basically releases melatonin based on your circadian rhythms. So right, the sun comes up, and then there's part of your brain says, "Hey, wake up!" And then like this.
Is that what your brain does?
That's what my brain does. And yeah, there's actually a separate optic nerve that goes from your eyes. It bypasses the normal pathway. It goes straight to the pineal gland and only picks up certain wavelengths of blue that occur in very early morning or late evening. So, so the pineal gland, this thing has piezoelectric. I'll write that down because it's a neat word. Piezoelectric. Some people pronounce it different. But what this does is you have like a mechanical energy, right? So you think of mechanical energy like moving things. I'm like kicking things. I'm crushing things. I'm like work, you know. And electrical energy, like I'm being electrocuted, or I'm like plugging my phone into the wall, right? So piezoelectric energy. Piezoelectric crystals can transfer between these two. So you squeeze them, and they generate a voltage. You run current through them, they change their shape. So we have crystals in the middle of our brain that when they interact with electromagnetic fields, which are everywhere and which are also generated by brains. Yeah. So when they interact with electrical fields, they change shape. So I don't think anybody's studied this because it's super taboo, but I'm not a real scientist, so I can say it. So I mean, this is a possible mechanism for like telepathy, and you don't have to believe anything I'm saying. In fact, you probably shouldn't. But
Don't believe him, he's crazy.
But does that make sense what I'm saying here? It is your brain's wobbling and making all sorts of it's firing, right? It's like electricity going through your brain. It's not a lot, you know. You're not being electrocuted, but and then that electricity is causing vibrations in the electromagnetic fields around you. And those vibrations can be picked up by piezoelectric crystals in other people's brains.
Okay, so like a less far-fetched idea. I mean, I don't know anything about telepathy, but like it's maybe like intuition. It's like how you can't explain how you know something, but you just know it.
I think that could be a mechanism for that.
For like intuition, and like